Hello. I want to welcome you to today's webinar. My name is Andrew Henk, and on behalf of the Connective Leadership Institute, it's a pleasure to have you with us today. Our webinar session will be featuring Professor Jean Lipman-Blumen as she presents how connective leaders behave. This is the second installment in our 2017 webinar series from the Connective Leadership Institute. If you were unable to join us in January, you can log on to our website to view the webinar recording at connectiveleadership.com. Now let me introduce our presenter, Professor Jean Lipman-Blumen. She is the Thornton F. Bradshaw Professor of Public Policy and Professor of Organizational Behavior at the Peter F. Drucker and Masatoshi Ito Graduate School of Management at Claremont Graduate University. She has published 7 books and more than 200 articles on leadership, crisis management, public policy, organizational behavior, and gender issues. Her book, Connective Leadership, was nominated for a Pulitzer Prize. And in 2010, she received the Lifetime Achievement Award from the International Leadership Association that honors an individual's accomplishments in the development and enhancement of the field of leadership over his or her lifetime. And with that, I would like to introduce Jean.
Good morning, good afternoon, depending where you are in the U.S. Good evening if you're in Europe, and good tomorrow morning if you're in Asia. Welcome to our second webinar on connective leadership. Last time I spoke about the overarching idea of connective leadership and the way in which connective leaders are perfect for the time in which we live because they know how to integrate diversity and interdependence, because diversity brings together many different groups with different agendas that may very well have areas of conflict, but connective leaders know how to find the sweet spot among those many agenda items and begin there. So connective leaders are really valuable in this interdependent, connected era. And today what I want to talk about are the underlying behaviors, the behavioral foundation of connective leadership. And that means simply the characteristic behaviors that we all use and get used to using and get good at using for accomplishing our tasks or achieving whatever goals we set for ourselves. Now, we're talking about learned behavior. All behavior is learned. It's not embedded in our character, and that's great because that means we can change our behavior if we choose to. So we can modify our behavior through various means, including formal coaching or seminars like the ones that we do at Connective Leadership, and practice in various ways on our own. Connective leadership gives us a palette of behaviors that we can use in different combinations as the situation demands, and that's where emotional intelligence and social intelligence come to the fore. A few warnings first about achieving styles. No style is intrinsically good or bad. Each style actually represents a very broad repertoire of behaviors, and each behavior can have many motives. So I think I'd like to warn everybody that it's very dangerous to attribute motivation to behavior, because you can have behavior that looks the same from 2 different people, but their motives for using those behaviors may be very different. Now, this is a diagram of the LBL Achieving Styles model. LBL, for those who are curious, stands for Lipman-Blumen Levitt. That means Harold Levitt, who is the Kilpatrick Professor of Organizational Behavior at Stanford Business School, and the father of organizational behavior, actually. There are 3 sets of achieving styles: the direct set, the instrumental set, the relational set. And we divide them into sets, not because there are any hard and fast demarcations between the various sets, but simply as a way of helping people to remember the styles, because we all know from research that most of us can only remember a sequence of 7. So here we've broken the 9 down into 3 sets of 3s. So let's drill down on the direct set. That's the first set, the yellow styles. And people who prefer the direct set like to master their own tasks. They want to know how to do it themselves. There was an aspirin ad many years ago with a daughter saying to the mother, "Mother, I'd rather do it myself." And that's exactly, that exactly expresses the way people who prefer the direct set of behaviors think and act. So they like to do it themselves. They don't like to depend on other people. And there are 3 styles within this set, as you'll see are in the others too: intrinsic, competitive, and power. The intrinsic direct that's the one that most expresses the preference for autonomy, to do it oneself, and not be drawn down oftentimes by what people who are high on this style feel is the less perfect contribution of others. People who are who have a high score on intrinsic direct are guided by what we think of as an internal standard of excellence. In other words, it's in their own head, and they compare themselves to their past best performance. And their goal is to perform the task absolutely perfectly, and they get intrinsic satisfaction from doing that. They don't need extrinsic rewards, and that's how that label came about. When they do something perfectly, they see it as poetic, as beautiful, as pleasurable, as thrilling, and it means a lot to do it themselves and do it perfectly. And given a challenge, that is a perfect day for someone who's high on intrinsic direct. They love to set themselves against a challenge and see how they do. And they like to be in control of the goal that they're seeking and the means or the ways of getting there. If we turn to the second one in the direct set, it's competitive, and this I think is a fairly recognizable behavior. People who are high on competitive are guided by an external standard of excellence compared to the internal standard that their intrinsic cousins are guided by. They compare themselves to other people who they think are relevant and appropriate people whom they would like to outdo. Their goal is simply to win, not to be perfect, not to do something perfectly, but to be the best, whatever that means. And they too like to control what the goal is and how to get there. The third behavior in this set we call power direct. And people who are high on power are very good organizers. They like orderliness. They're very good at taking a chaotic situation and bringing order to it. They like to organize themselves. They like to organize you. They like to organize resources. They like to organize how things are done. And they like to not simply to organize, but to control all of these aspects. And as you can see from the slide, people who get carried away with power direct can fall into the trap of micromanagers. And that is when you over-control and you don't give people breathing space to be their own creative selves. People who are high on power, as you might well imagine, are very concerned about controlling the goal and how to get there. If we turn to the second set, the instrumental set, we see that here too there are three styles. We call these styles denatured Machiavellianism because they have all the savvy and political know-how of a Machiavelli, but the difference is they're using themselves and you and everyone else both ethically and openly. They are not manipulating you so that you do things that you don't realize you're doing that they want you to do. You have a say in this. The instrumental styles include personal, social, and entrusting, and we'll look at each one now. The personal style involves using everything about yourself to attract others. The way you look, the way you dress, the way you speak, your physical appearance, your intelligence, your humor, particularly self-deprecating humor, your family background, your educational pedigree. Charisma, this is the home of charismatic behavior. People who use charisma and everything about themselves to draw you into their task. And that means they're very theatrical, they're dramatic, they like symbolism. Why symbolism? Well, because symbolism communicates succinctly and hits us in our emotional solar plexus. It gets to us, we remember it. So they like to use, and they're very good at using costume and ritual and timing. And Gandhi was a perfect example of this when he went from wearing ordinary Western dress to a homespun dhoti to symbolize India's reliance on self-made and primitive kinds of technology. We've already talked about counterintuitive gestures, but I can't emphasize that enough because they're really important and they grab our attention. When people do things we're not expecting them to do, when your enemy reaches out a hand of friendship to you, it puts you off guard. So for the moment, you're not really as in control of how you're going to respond, and you probably respond in a more emotional way. They're very good at persuading other people to join their task. They're good at negotiating to get the best arrangement possible, and they're good at mediating difficulties between and among other people. And they too are very much concerned about being in charge of what the goal is and how to get there. The social instrumental, the second one in the instrumental set, is very interesting because these people, I always think of it as these people having a contact list like we have on our computers, but in their heads. When they meet you, they record everything about you, who you are, to whom you're related, where you went to school, where you work, what your background is, what experience, what skills, to whom are you related, with whom do you have connections. All of that becomes part of their mental contact list. Their networkers. In fact, I think the word networking was designed specifically for people who are high on social instrumental. They know everyone in the room, and if there's someone they don't know when they come in, they'll know that person before they leave. And they're generous with that contact list. They'll give you names of people and put you in touch with just the right person for the task you have in mind. And the interesting thing about social instrumental individuals is that not only do they use you and themselves and everyone else as a means to an end, and they do it openly. They ask you, they tell you that they want to do this, and they seek your permission, but they always are seeking ethical ends. So you can depend upon a connective leader who's high on social instrumental to be open and ethical about the way that person uses you, him or herself, and other people. And here too, they control the means and the ends. And you think, well, if everybody controls the means and the ends, why do you keep saying it? Well, here we go. Look at entrusting. Entrusting, people give up their control over the means. They agree upon the goal, work with you to establish the goal and an understanding of a goal that's ethical and legal, but then they leave it all up to you. They give up the means. They let go of the means. And I call this leadership by expectation, because unlike their social instrumental cousins, they don't look for the person who has just the right experience or background. They believe that anyone sitting around the table or anyone in that group could rise to the occasion and do the job even if they've never done it before. And it took me a while to figure out, why this happened, because it happens on a regular basis. And I think I understood it when I read the work of Robert Cialdini, who wrote about influence and about reciprocation, that when the leader asks you to do something that you've never done before, picks you out of that group to put the burden on you, the task is yours, you have to rise to that occasion. So the leader can expect that you will reciprocate, and reciprocate by doing the task both ethically and very well. And Cialdini talks about the fact that if there were not a reciprocation norm in every society, the generous people would die out, and pretty soon there would be no generosity in any society. So he argues that reciprocation is built into all societies. So leadership by expectation is important and powerful, because when I have an expectation that you can do something, that means I'm giving you the gift of my confidence. And the only way you can repay me is to live up to that. In fact, maybe go beyond anything I expect. But the other aspect of this that's interesting and important is that the leader then has to accept the helper's vision and outcome, and it may be very different than what the leader was anticipating, because this kind of behavior, leadership by expectation, brings out and unlocks other people's creativity and self-confidence. So they often talk about how they did the best thing they ever did in their lives. They also stand up taller when they talk about this. If you ever meet somebody who has been entrusted in that way and you ask them about how they did it, you'll see this visual transformation, that they stand up taller when they tell you what a great job they did. So the person, the leader who uses and feels comfortable with entrusting instrumental behavior, gives up control over the means as long as there's agreement on the goals. Now we're turning to the last set, the relational set, which is much more familiar. And let me say one last thing about the instrumental set. It's that set of behaviors that ties together the more familiar relational set that we'll talk about in a minute, and the direct set. Those are styles that people have used comfortably always. The instrumental set, not so much really. In some societies like Italy, social instrumental is important. What family you belong to makes a big difference in whether or not you get the best bunch of flowers in the flower shop that day, or you get the ones that are half wilted. That comes from personal experience I had, but don't have time to go into. If we look at the relational set, here too we have three styles: collaborative, contributory, and vicarious. And in the relational set, people who prefer these behaviors contribute either actively or passively to other people's tasks, not their own individual tasks. Collaborative. Anybody who's ever worked on a team knows what I'm talking about when I say collaborative relational behavior. People who prefer this style love to work on a team. They love the camaraderie, the excitement, the warmth that comes from working with others. And they not only are willing to share the credit, but they'll assume their portion of the blame as well. Mike Csikszentmihalyi talks about individual flow, the sense of excitement and self-forgetfulness that one experiences when working on something that individual really loves. Well, that's what happens with collaborative relational, but it's at the group level. The people working on a team, when they're working at their most effective, experience flow. It's exciting, it's fun, and people who work in hot groups, as Hal Levitt and I wrote about, also experience flow at the group level. They're in love with doing what they do, and they love collaborating and working together. But that doesn't mean that working collaboratively is all sweetness and light. Not necessarily at all. But people who work consistently and seek out collaborative relationships understand that there are tensions that come along with it, tensions of sometimes feeling competitive with other people on the team, feeling resentful, but the satisfaction that comes from collaboration overrides those tensions. So people who are high on collaborative agree on the goal, but they may have different combined means of getting there. If we move to the contributory relational style, these are people who like to work behind the scenes. They help other people to do their task, but they don't want any public recognition for it, and they usually don't get public recognition. If you listen to the speeches of various politicians, most of the time there's a speechwriter who wrote that speech, and you don't know who that person is. But presumably the speechwriter gets a real sense of personal accomplishment when everybody says that the president gave a great speech. So their fulfillment of their need for accomplishment comes from the front runner being successful and using their contribution to gain that success. And we might note that these people often can do that job the front job by themselves if they had to, and we've seen that in emergencies. Nurses in the operating room could probably perform an appendectomy that they've seen performed 300 or 400 times, and if the surgeon were to drop dead in the operating room, could probably step up and take over. But they prefer being a helper behind the scenes. So they provide the means, and the means may be dictated by the other person. They just provide the means and abide by the ends that other people have determined. And the last one of the 9, and the last one in the triad of relational styles, is vicarious achieving style. And that means that the individual who uses this style identifies very strongly with the person who's actually engaged in the activity. And one might say there's no space between their ego and the other person's ego, so that they experience the other person's success as their own. And they really feel they have achieved. Think of fans in a sports stadium, how elated they are when their team wins, even though they haven't been out on the field. Or a parent listening to a child on stage from the back of a darkened auditorium, how exciting and fulfilled and proud they feel when the child is successful, and how nervous they feel when the child stumbles and reaches for a line. Remember, they don't make any direct contribution to the task. They might help indirectly by mentoring, by giving advice, by coaching, but they don't actually do anything that's directly part of the task. So they control neither the means nor the ends, and they are perfectly happy or comfortable with means and ends that other people have defined. Now, those are the 9 styles in 3 sets of 3. The important thing that I'd like to leave with you is not only an understanding of each of these 9 styles, and remember the thousands of behaviors you could use to implement those styles, but that you use them in combinations that are appropriate for the given situation that you face. So you have to have agility. You have to be able to recognize what styles, what behaviors are required for that situation, and use them comfortably. So it means using all of the styles enough so that when you really must call upon a certain style, it doesn't feel awkward, it doesn't feel unnatural to you. And if you're able to integrate all 9 achieving styles as connective leaders can very successfully, then you too, I think, can feel you're on the road to connective leadership. And these are the strategies that we are all, every single one of us, is going to need to be successful in a world that is characterized by interdependence and diversity. So I urge you, try them. You'll like them, I assure you.